Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. You are in Growing Attention in an Age of Distraction, and this is a session that is about the core orientation of attending. This is a session that we will be repeating to faculty and throughout breakouts this year, and I'm glad you're here because it is one of our key areas that we really, really want to see our community grow in. So with that said, I'm going to start today with a quote, and it's our first slide. If Krista, if you wouldn't mind advancing it, or actually I think it's the third slide. And the quote is, oops, no, there you go. Distraction is the only thing that consoles us for our miseries, and yet it is itself the greatest of our miseries. I think it's interesting to note that this quote was made in the 17th century. You can go ahead and click that. It's a 17th century French philosopher. Kind of sounds like a common quote, doesn't it? But maybe throughout the ages, distraction has been something that has really caused us to move away from seeing the Lord. I think in today's culture, what I see is that we are very, very easily distracted by an information age that's moving fast and only getting faster. There's so much technology, so much media, so much information, so much to react to. And I don't know about you, but we try to speed up to match the pace. That's what I find myself trying to do. We try to stay up late, or we get up early to answer all those emails. We tweet, we Facebook, we LinkedIn, we scan new websites to make sure we stay up to date on the latest updates. And it's so hard at times to resist the beep or vibration of that new text message. But I'm here to say to you today that I believe it's counterproductive for us to try to catch it all. Never before has it been so important to say no. No, I'm not going to read that article or that email. No, I'm not going to answer that text or take that phone call. It's hard to do because maybe, just maybe, that next piece of information is key. Is that not just the sense you always get? That's why for me, I'm having to learn to practice the art of a to-do list every day, which I've always done, and I'm now having the not-to-do list, and to learn to live by that as well. And I would tell you that your kid's success actually hinges upon doing just that, our willingness to slow down, make space for contemplation, silence, for the spiritual disciplines, for a mindfulness, a wholeheartedness in the day you're granted with the people in the present moment. I think it's interesting that modern psychology is developing a number of therapeutic applications based on the concept of mindfulness. And by mindfulness, what they're meaning is paying attention and staying in the present moment, to bring one's complete attention to the present experience on a moment-to-moment basis. That's what we're talking about with one of our core orientations that we introduced yesterday. That's that core orientation of engaging, that we are able to slow down and do one activity fully at a time. And it's something we really want to see our kids be able to do. You know, we all know that technology is clearly the future. No one's going to dispute that. And to ignore it as a tool seems irresponsible. It really is. Yet its downsides are essential to examine and combat as well. So today, what I want to say to you parents is you are obviously parenting in a media-crazed world, and you're the first to deal with a generation of kids who will be raised entirely plugged in. We're just now starting to get studies what we can learn from, and I think it's so important that we learn from these studies. So the key idea today is that you teach your kids how to use technology wisely and teach them the spiritual disciplines of the soul that are found outside of this high-tech social media world. So what are the skills your kids need? That's what we're going to look at today, and I'm going to tell you the two references I'm using is Distracted by Maggie Jackson. She has a great book out. It's kind of a couple years old now, but it was built on the brain research done by Mike Posner out of Oregon, who is a neuroscientist. And then also the new book, Digital Invasion by Dr. Hart and Dr. Sylvia Hartfield, his daughter, and that book is available downstairs, just released. has the latest research in just the technology invasion and digital invasion and what we can do about it. And a lot of the tips I've given you on your sheet come from their research. You know, this time, like all times, is a very good one if we but know what to do with it. And that's the point today. We don't need to look at technology and think, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Technology is here to stay, and there's no question it's going to reshape how our kids learn. We just have to be carefully attentive to the consequences of how learning is being modified. 43% of students report that social media interrupts their studying 3 or more times per hour. See, these digital interruptions are bound to have a detrimental effect on learning, especially for the undisciplined student, So our goal as a school is to stay abreast of the facts and research, and most importantly, the young minds honestly need to rest. That without proper boundaries, these kids are robbed of sleep and a chance for their brains to slow down, and we need to build in times and teach them how to do that. So, you know, there's a lot of good about the digital world, and really one good thing about the digital world, and this is the next slide, is that we're always reachable, okay? It's the upside of it. The downside is we're always reachable. It's true. And if we have to understand that technology promises to let us do anything from anywhere with anyone. Now, this is a quote by Cheryl Turkle from MIT. She says, but it also drains us as we try to do everything, everywhere. We begin to feel overwhelmed and depleted by the lives technology makes possible. See, it's that flashing notification that becomes that trigger, that text that comes in. She goes on to say, we carry our cell phones into every activity, including those that require careful attention. And it is as if we have given our mobile phones the privilege of intrusion, whereas no one else has that same privilege. A privileged intruder and a subtle form of excitement and arousal. There's no question there's a bright side to technology. And those things, just real briefly, instant access to a wealth of information. And how wonderful is that? I can't imagine not having that anymore. Venues for social interaction. Email is definitely more speedy and effective than mailing letters. Easy purchasing ability. I mean, I don't know about you, but I love purchasing online. Instant worldwide communication. Texting, instant communication, connection almost in any setting. It's been great to be able to text Krista and say, Krista, we need this here, we need this there. I mean, that is a wonderful advancement. The Bible accessible in every major language anywhere in the world. I mean, those are really good sides to technology. But we need to also look at the downside. One of them is that we're more sedentary as a society. We spend less time outdoors. Life indoors used to be boring without screens, but now it seems like all the fun is indoors. We don't have the ability to see an unplugged generation anymore. Kids today are the first all-digital generation, and yet we know little about the physical, emotional, relational consequences of this extreme exposure to the digital world. That's the issue. Brains are changing by how we learn, and we don't know if this change is good or bad. Researchers are warning that the ability to contemplate or meditate declines with those who engage in the digital world. And that clearly impacts our ability to pray. In many cases, media is becoming the other parent. It just seems to be something that's encroaching on family time and meal time and all these other times. There's so much less face-to-face time. I was saddened when I read in one study how they're showing an impact of mothers and nursing babies because they don't have that eye-to-eye contact as much because a mother's busy on her cell phone or whatever else. Also, sleep deprivation. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later because it's a huge impact on students today. If you were here earlier with the video we showed, there's many kids today who sleep with that cell phone under their pillow so they won't miss a text during the nighttime. Oh my gosh. Anyway, interesting note, though, here's a positive. Families that have healthy and frequent conversations find technology aiding that process. That's what they're showing. While families without such healthy interactions find that technology exasperates the isolation of its members. So it can help or it can hurt. And you see, the laptop or smartphone that you have is not inherently evil, but the value you place on it will determine whether it serves you or you serve it. There's researchers who believe that the life in the digital world is causing us to lose our depth of thinking, contemplation, feeling, and emotions. And there's this emerging recognition that the shallow depth in the cognitive processors is causing a new range of problems. One of them is that the digital gadgets are so smart we don't have to be smart ourselves. So we don't have to remember how to spell, how to do math, how to research a project. We can get the answer we need with the click of a mouse. They feel that that's making kids dumber. So we need to consider that, because a lot of this is new and we don't know where we're headed with it. So I'm going to start here and look at the issue of attention and why it's important. And I think we need to be able to define what attention is to our students. It's the brain's conductor. It leads in the orchestration of our minds. It makes everything filter and get organized. And its various networks are key not only to higher forms of thinking, but to our very morality, to our very humanness. Without attention as that symphonic conductor, the music in our brain disintegrates into noise. We need to grow the networks of attention. The word attention is rooted in the Latin words ad intendere, and it means stretching toward, implying effort or intention. And that's why the word attention span literally means a bridge. It's a connection. And for centuries, people thought it was you were born with a certain amount of attention. And now, without a doubt, research is showing it's shaped. Means we can change it. It's strengthened and it's trained. So that's the issue that we need to look at today, is that how are we shaping and training the attention of our young minds through the digital world. Many believe that rote learning is taking over what used to be reasoned learning, that the ability to think deeply and wrestle with text and all those things that come from attention is taking away creativity, inventiveness, and all those other things. And one of the concerns is that there's a second growth of dendrites in the brain in adolescence, and it's a time where if you don't use those networks, your brain prunes them back to those that you're using. So our young kids, our adolescents, they need to be using and growing these networks because they become harder to grow over time. It's not that they won't grow, but they're at a prime age of growing these networks at these young ages. I want to read to you a quote from Gordon Grafman, who is the chief of cognitive neuroscience at the National Institute of Neurological Disorders. He says, technology in general can be good for children's cognitive development if it is used judiciously, but if it is used in a non-judicious fashion, it will shape the brain in what I think will actually be a negative way. That's his quote. So how is all this media impacting the development of our three networks of attention? That's what we're going to consider when we talk about these networks of attention that need to develop. The first one is orienting, and this is normally in place by kindergarten. That's how a kindergarten student is going to perceive their environment. They're going to know if somebody walks into the room or if something's happening. It's kind of that flashlight that they know what's happening. It's a bridge to one another. They see who's in the room. They see who their teacher is. They're watching what's going on. But there's a second network that develops after that, and that's the alerting one, and that's the one who turns the lights off and on and keeps that focus going on what they need to be focusing on, moving into wakefulness. And this is the cornerstone of sensitivity to their surroundings. And when we race breathlessly through life detached from our surroundings, then we shortcut this. And this is the art of knowing what to overlook and what to pay attention to. It's the art of knowing that when a kid walks by a window in a classroom, that you're still paying attention to your teacher, that you're not distracted over here. It's called wakefulness. Here's the interesting part. These three networks, which they can watch form, are necessary for the development of executive function. And that doesn't happen. An executive function is the heart of self-control. It's those crucial capabilities from planning and problem solving and understanding. And so in order for a child to get to that executive function and the network of self-control even, these other things need to form. These are important networks that need to form in kids. And there's other brain systems that are being shaped and trained, and this is what they're looking at. This is what brain research currently is doing that we need to be abreast of. I'm going to read to you some of these other brain systems that this book talks about, and since I'm not a scientist, I'm just going to read you what they say. But the first is the brain's pleasure system. Has another name that I can't pronounce, but it's the part of the brain that delivers a feeling of pleasure or joy. Overloading of this system robs us of pleasures in the little things of life. Dopamine is the basic neurotransmitter that carries a signal to your pleasure center, and as you go for more and more pleasure, you push the dopamine levels higher and higher. This dopamine flooding creates a spiraling effect that results in compulsive behavior, abuse, or addictions. And what happens with all the blinking, bright, toggling, sensational, fast-moving media is it increases this dopamine, okay, that moves to the pleasure center, which makes that type of, all that media stuff somewhat addictive, but they're also seeing an increase in the rise of what's called anhedonia, and that's the inability to experience ordinary pleasure. It's pleasurelessness. And that's the increase that's happening as a result of kids getting addicted to this toggling that happens with the media. Takes away the energy we need to pursue the things that bring meaningful enjoyment, those ordinary feelings and things that God created us to enjoy. And see, when we feel the deepest of pleasures when we're fully engaged in our uniqueness, our passions, and our purpose. And I believe that our brains were really not designed to enjoy this constant high level of stimulation. Really wearies the brain. 2, the second system that they talk about is the brain's tranquility system. And I'm going to read to you what they say. I think this is really frightening. The constant stimulation of the brain by our overused techno gadgets causes a stress hormone called cortisol to increase. Excessive, unneeded cortisol can block important tranquility receptors, causing the brain to shut down its production of natural tranquilizers. Computer games are designed to give you an adrenal kick, and whenever adrenaline goes up, cortisol does also. A part of the cortisol's function is to block the tranquility receptors so as to block the tranquility receptors that make you more anxious. Actually, it blocks those so that if you could rise up and there's an emergency, you can deal with it, okay? So it blocks them then. The persistent elevation of cortisol, such as we see in digital addictions or multitasking, also increases your risk of serious health disorders for this reason, because having too much cortisol is not good on your system. I think that's really fascinating, that God made us with natural tranquilizers. It's pretty cool. The third system is the brain's learning system. Again, I'm going to read to you from the researchers. Learning is brain-based, and the system can become fatigued. They call it neural system fatigue, and they said that no real learning takes place when one is constantly being distracted. When children keep their brains busy with digital input, they forfeit downtime, and downtime is what the brain needs between learning tasks so that it can process and consolidate the information it is learning. This is not a fatigue problem, it's a lack of time to process problem. This also disrupts creativity. And the fifth system is the brain's attachment system. They say we're hardwired for attachment, and our first attachment should be to God. Human attachment is a biological need as well. What will be the impact on our youth who now have limited face-to-face interactions with parents and friends? Digital contacts can never compensate for real face-to-face interactions with those you love. So they recommend that we build in as many face-to-face encounters as we can. The point of all this is these are important systems. Just as we have muscles in our physical body that need rejuvenating, these also need rejuvenation. The brain is actually at rest when it's a thinking brain when it's at rest. The brain needs adequate recovery time in order to contemplate, to meditate, to pray. And when your brain gets the rest it needs, you'll learn better and you're more creative. So they really encourage unplugging on a regular basis. And that's why we really encourage not having those cell phones and technologies in the kids' rooms. I do, and I don't know if I'm going to have a chance to get to it. We have a ton, and there's sections I'm going to actually skip today, but yes, we do. Very much impacts that. We'll talk about it a little bit in a little later here. So I guess what we want to think about is if we're being trained and shaped by the use of digital technology, we have to always ask ourselves how that's happening and to remind ourselves in Romans 12:2 where it says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect will of God, that we have time for prayer, that our brains aren't too tired to meditate and to contemplate truth, because that's what's going to transform our kids' minds. And if they're too busy and distracted, we're taking away that essential component of transformation.
Are we talking about music as well?
Yes, yes. And really, it's music, yes and no. I think there's, one of the things we've learned in the classical training is that good music, you know, that has good lyrics and good tones are actually, they feed the soul. That's what we need to be putting into the minds of our kids. In fact, there's such a strong connection to music and learning, but it's the constant noise and the distractedness and the type of music that you're listening to. I would say as a school, we're starting to value music more and more. But we want to make sure our children have the ability to have silence too and not needing that noise to keep them distracted. So a couple facts about today. It's funny for me to watch young kids because I'll see so many times in the mall or any place or even at meals in restaurants, everybody holds a phone that they're checking. Everybody's talking on their phones or texting. And some of the research that came out a few years ago is that 16% of time over the weekend is actually spent together, parent and child anymore. They're all in their own rooms with their own screens. That was a fact 3 years ago. It's probably changed already. Only 17% of families, the study showed, said eat meals together. And 2/3 of children under 6 live in homes that keep the TV on half or more of the time. And that's an environment that's linked to attention deficiencies. The American Pediatrics Association has come out right now and saying the amount of TV time any child 3 and under gets directly is linked to their ability to pay attention. So it's super important that we're aware that even a TV on that they're not watching, it's designed to bring their attention to it and distract them. And they found that kids don't play as well or as undistractedly if there's a TV on that's trying to draw them to it with the sound and the noise. But I think this is fascinating because now they're finding that the highly stimulating computers and phones and iPads appear to have even a more powerful effect than TV. And I think it's just so fast moving. I was watching, Joey's asking me the other day, he likes encyclopedias, and we were looking at this encyclopedia, and it talked about the Flintstones being the first cartoon that came out, you know, and I thought, yay, that was the Flintstones. So I wanted to show him what the Flintstones were, so we pulled up an old video online. I was shocked at how much less action and how much slower paced. I didn't realize it then, but the new cartoons are so much more, yeah, they're just so fast. But we watched this whole video thing. I thought I was watching, even that way the eyes blink and the people move, you know, it's just changed so much. Yeah. We also watched the Jetsons that with Joy. That was really interesting too. But anyway, what they're finding today is only 1/4 of high school graduates are college ready in 4 main subjects areas today. And 16% of 15-year-olds scored at or below the most basic level of problem solving. And they're finding that 8 to 18-year-olds spend 8 hours a day multitasking electronic media, and that adults have the same stat now. So here we go. Interesting to note that the Greeks called impulsivity a deficiency of the will, a deficiency really of self-control. I think it comes down to that. The self-control is vital for our kids' success. And that's the essence of looking literally and cognitively before you leap. So you're constantly balancing your thought and emotion and actions, and you're knowing what to attend to. Because you could have the strongest of motivations and the highest of goals, yet you're going to get sidetracked by distractions and temptations and obstacles of life if you don't have a mind that has self-control. It's interesting, they also show that students who study longer and get more deeply involved in their courses report making greater gains in critical thinking, and they actually like school better. They're more engaged. I have a lot of notes on reading and memory, and if we get back to the end, I didn't put them on the slides because I don't think we're going to have time today, but I want to just say this, that even reading is interesting because it requires networks that are developed between the sight and the sound portions of the brain. And the link to reading is attention, it's focus and time spent doing that. So when we're asking kids to read, we're asking them to rewire their brains. It's all about wiring those networks and making those connections. And so even reading, it requires the visual, this is what they say, the visual and the phonological areas in question must be strongly linked by a reorganization of the brain, and this network must become automatic, reflexive, and that comes by a way of focused attention over time. Because it's attention that knits these new patterns in the brain. Same is true of research skills, and today's professors and colleges are seeing that students want quick and dirty ways to finish a task, and they opt for convenience over actually digging. And one professor said the greatest menace to academics and spiritual growth is not ignorance, but the illusion of knowledge. They think they know so much, but they don't really understand what they're not getting. And I think, Sarah, where are you? Where's Sarah Feiger? Is she in here? Okay. She gave me an article that's interesting just recently in the paper and talked about what teachers want. They're saying that kids don't use their pencils anymore to write. And she says that she's found over time that anyone under 18 should still own a pencil because somehow when you're pencil writing, you're thinking more deeply and you're paying more attention. And so that's what some of the teachers are starting to recommend. I think memory is really fascinating to me because people don't have to memorize anymore, and yet it's what we put into our memory banks that come out when we really need it. It's like we can have the storehouse of stuff within ourselves if we have memory created, but if it's just an external memory, an iPhone or an iPad, or I find for me, like I don't have to memorize phone numbers anymore, and I think, what am I doing to my brain? I don't have to memorize. But I have to tell you this, and some of you have heard me say this, my own dad, my mom became a believer in her 40s, and my dad was really an agnostic until his 70s, and he started to memorize scripture because he wanted to keep his brain strong, so he memorized the Psalms in 4 languages, and that's what brought him to the Lord, because he had it in his heart. After memorizing and working on the scripture, it made sense to him. So I always love the fact that when I think of memory, I always think of my dad. Who someday I will see. Archibald Hart was really big in bringing the issue of multitasking to the front in Thrilled to Death, and he's the new book, The Digital Invasion Downstairs, he and his daughter wrote. But he would tell you that multitasking is a big problem for kids today, and it's because they don't really want to focus on homework. It's not fun. There's all these other options. And see, a lack of self-control will favor the virtual world over homework. It's just going to, because kids want immediate gratification, they want temporary happiness, and honestly, that's what they're going to select unless they learn the importance and they have some controls. I want to read to you a quote, and I think it's on the next slide. There is time enough for everything in the course of the day if you do but one thing at once. But there is not time enough in a year if you will do multiple things at a time. This author goes on to say, the steady and undissipated attention to one object is a sure mark of a superior genius, as hurry, bustle, and agitation are the never-failing symptoms of a weak and frivolous mind. And the reason I haven't put the title up here is this was written in 1747, Lord Chesterfield to his son. So I think it's amazing that some of these quotes are coming back from people of way back seeing the same problem. See, multitasking, it's what we do over sequential tasking. And by sequential tasking, it's that ability to take a process and complete it. And over and over and over, studies are showing that the brain can't fully function when it's pushed to multitask, that it takes longer to complete tasks and it increases errors. And of course, I can stand and hold my microphone here, so I'm multitasking. It depends upon the difficulty of the task. Like, I can have my cell phone on my lap and actually talk when I'm driving, but if I'm going to text and drive, that's a little dangerous. But students like to multitask, they think they can, and they tend to multitask a pleasant task with a dull task, okay? They're gonna Facebook and watch TV while they're doing their homework, because that homework is work. So I'm gonna read to you this study, because I think this is fascinating. Studies at Harvard and Stanford universities using their brightest students support this finding. Giving them sequential and multitasking projects, they found that all the students' performances were reduced by about a third when multitasking. Here's the interesting part. Yet, all reported at the end that they thought they were actually doing better than when multitasking than sequential tasking. See, sequential tasking can be frustrating because it makes you feel boredom, that you're sticking to something and finishing it out. And these students actually think they can handle multitasking. But the truth is, they can't. See, we need to ponder techniques for managing our thoughts and teach our kids not to vacate the driver's seat and get lulled into not understanding what's happening. So, Leslie.
I just want my sons that pointed out to me that it's impossible to multitask, and I think it's an important thing to consider. It's not actually multitasking. You're not really doing two things at the same time. You're doing them side by side and you keep switching. And therein lies the issue. That your brain never remains focused on one thing long enough to,
The sequential piece, yes. Yeah. And really, multitasking is really split focus, and split focus is pretty fuzzy. Yeah. Very, very good point. Glenn?
I love as I read that deal with you too, the all was caps and underlined. These are best students at Stanford, best students at Harvard, and all of them.
Yeah.
So your kid says, yeah, but I'm different. No. All of the students thought they did better, and all of them did worse.
Yes.
So don't let them tell you, well, I'm different. It isn't.
So true. I'm going to move a little bit here into the other pieces of media, and that's social media, which is huge. I mean, hey, probably everyone in this room uses social media. I know I do. But for the kids' world, when they're young, the texting, the sexting, the Facebook, the Twitter, the Instagram, they move around. And Instagram is really big now in our middle school kids. And there's all these ways that they get around even parents seeing it, and they're sending pictures, and they're doing all this stuff. There's millions of apps, and they feel lost without their phones, and they feel lost without this because they don't know life without it. And I want to tell you, kids like it because they like the feeling of freedom and impulsivity and the flexibility it gives them. They like the control of texting. They can start it and shut it down as they please. Kids break up relationships and start them over texting. And I tell you, they feel in control, but that's vastly, vastly different than self-control. Vastly different. And see, what they don't understand is with computers increasingly being used to do homework, kids know there's a choice and that homework isn't the only option. So when you're not supervising that computer use, kids are left to their own devices and impetus, and usually homework isn't what they choose to do. It's that second you get bored, and I know the temptation when I'm working on a talk or on a project that's hard work, that sequential piece of finishing it out. What do I want to do? Well, do I want to check Facebook? Do I want to check email? It's so tempting. So I'm really having to practice that art of that no list. And that's one of the things that even for my quiet time, half a year ago, I finally decided I'm not checking phone or email until quiet time is over in the morning. Because the second I got onto that phone or email, I got in this thread, one thing led to another, and before I knew it, my mind was so distracted that I had not brought my attention upward in gratitude to the Lord for a new day. Those are those things, we can do this. We just have to build in these spiritual disciplines. See, we want to embrace technology as a wonderful accompaniment to our life, but it is not the main event. It just cannot be, and our boundaries for it are so important. This one author talked about how social media really fosters narcissism. The video we just watched is true because we're so preoccupied with presenting ourselves and trying to get the attention of others, and it facilitates this focus on self. MySpace, Facebook, broadcast yourself, all those things. It's like, why is it so important that we're telling everybody all this stuff about ourselves? I think a good rule of thumb is that the digital world is good to relay necessary information, but to communicate deeper thoughts and emotions face-to-face with people. I think that would be the rule of thumb. I love texting to get quick things out to people. Or even email, I think you have to be careful, but I'm learning that there's so much lost in the communication and so much room for misunderstanding and so much time lost as a result that some of those things have to be saved. I want to say there's a lot of danger in the social media world, and sometime this year, we want Malaka to share a story about a friendship that turned toxic for her, and she has a really powerful story that she's going to be sharing sometime on what can happen, even in the adult world, in the social media world. And we all know the dangers of pornography, which is unbelievably frightening if you read this book. I'm not going to even have time today to talk about that. But for kids, there's many kids today who see texting as a necessary form of relationship currency today. You need to know that they think it's something they have to do. Not all, and it's certainly in our type of schooling, something that is absolutely not the norm. But we need to be aware not only of the legal implications for the sender and the receiver of pornography online, and we also have to teach a healthy theology of sex to our kids early on. We have books by Stan and Brenna Jones. You must be in there as a primary teacher and discipler of your kids early on. So I want to read to you some terms, cyber terms that I got from this book. These are real words now describing issues. One of them is nomophobia, and that's no mobile phone phobia on the rise. So if you don't have your phone with you, I'm that way. I left my phone downstairs a while ago. I thought, where's my phone? Where's my phone? That fear of not having that connection, there's a term for it, nomophobia. There's a new term coming out that's called attention deficit trait. You can Google these, they're there. And it's a condition that mimics ADD, but it results from the distraction of trying to perform 2 or more tasks at once simultaneously on the website. That's on the rise. There's a term that's been coined emotional contagion. And honestly, I see this with kids. It's the spread of positive and negative emotions via social media. See, there's significant implications for our kids because there's so much being stated. One person's negative experience and depression shared online can impact your kids. They're sharing their feelings and emotions with each other. They're very connected. They're sharing a lot of what's happening. There is an emotional contagion component for kids when they're wired and connected to each other like that. There's also that Facebook facade, that feeling that one is missing out on life that's quite common with Facebook users. You see that comparison trap of everybody having perfectly wonderful kids and every life is great, and these facades that are posted, and you wonder what's wrong with me, what's wrong with my quality of life. It's really easy to start to get into this comparison game if you spend much time on Facebook. I have a Facebook account. I limit my time a lot because I want to see what's going on, and I actually love it, and I love to like people and see what's going on, but I have to be very, very careful that I don't start to see it as or compare my own life to what I see happening with others just as a communication tool versus a comparison. There's also a Facebook depression, and it's that fear of what people think of us. So we work so hard to craft that right image, compose just the right pictures, the personal information, the status. And for kids today, there's such an emphasis on being clever, not genuine, and that their Facebook pages give that right image. So really, again, it's this non-reality world that takes us away from vulnerability and authentic relationships. And then there is what we all know, it's called absent presence, using your phone, checking messages, playing video games, playing with apps while you're with someone else. This book recommends that we practice present presence rather than absent presence. Now, finally, the new disorder, and it's called IAD, Internet Addiction Disorder. I'm going to read to you. Will be included in the 2013 Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders and considered a grave national health crisis. According to Parenting Magazine, moms are the new internet junkies, addicted to blogs, message boards, virtual sites. The consequences are that important relationships are neglected, loss of employment, loss of sleep, diminished energy, and health problems. Wow. Finally, I want to focus on the spiritual aspect here. Henry Nouwen says, without silence, it's impossible to have a spiritual life. Actually, I think that's a later quote, isn't it? Is that my next quote? Oh, so why don't you move on my other quote? I have my pages backwards. There you go. There you go. Okay. You might have heard me read this in a session the other day. I want to read it to you again. It was in the session I did yesterday morning. But Caldecott Stratford, in the book Beauty in the Word, he's a classical educator from London, said this about attention, and I just love this. So if you heard it before, you're going to like it again, but I'm going to read it to you. It is the child's own quality of attention that is key to the learning process. The subject studied and its content are less relevant than the goal of study, which is the development of attention. Why? Because prayer consists of attention, and all worldly study is really a stretching of the soul toward prayer. Attention is desire. It is the desire for light, for truth, for understanding, for possession. As the intelligence grows, joy is experienced, and the anticipation of joy is what arouses the effort of attention. It is what makes students of us. Making known to the child or student the special way of waiting on truth in every problem, whether it is in language or mathematics or any other subject, is the first duty of a teacher, for this makes it an exercise in waiting on God. Attention is really important. I put a quote up here to finish it out. He also went on to say, school studies have a higher purpose than the acquisition of information or worldly skills. These acquisitions will follow, but they are subordinate to the orienting of the soul to God, implicit in the act of attention. We need to free up space for God, people. See, when the pace of life is too fast, there is not enough rest for the body to recuperate, then our minds have little time to meditate and pray, so problems are never resolved or put into perspective. And the digital world can make us informationally rich, but as a consequence, spiritually poor. It isn't information that fosters our intimacy with God, but actually the absence of information. And that's that beautiful, beautiful psalm, be still and know that I am God, Psalm 46:10. We have to be still in order to know that he is God. We need space in order to breathe in the breath of life. L.B. Cohen says you must never face the day till you have faced God, nor looked into the face of another until you've looked into him. So I want to read to you a quote from a neuroscientist who's been researching this topic. His name is Andrew Newberg, and he wrote these findings in a book, How God Changes Your Brain. He says, these findings show that the frontal lobe in your brain creates and integrates all of your ideas about God, both positive and negative. He states that when the prefrontal part of the brain, the part that does our main thinking, gets overloaded, it begins to shut itself down. It's the digital invasion that overloads the frontal part of the brain, not only overusing it, but depleting it of simple energy. This impairs our ability to think deeply and consequently communicate with God in a meaningful way. So I really do think the key to protection lies in the realm of our spiritual practices, and that we're teaching our kids these practices. And I think that final quote was, without silence, it's impossible to have a spiritual life. So with that, I just want to draw your attention to a few points in the tips and guidelines, and if we have time for Q&A here, we can. But I'm not going to read this to you, but right at the top of the tips and guidelines, I want you to see the recommended screen limits from the American Academy of Pediatrics. We are way over that as a society. These limits, they recommend children 2 and under no screen time. And I'm assuming when they're talking screen time here, I'm not assuming this is working on the computer. Some of us work on the computer on typing and doing research. I'm talking about movies and videos and video games and that blinging bright stuff, that we are making sure we are limiting our kids. I think it's essential that we improve sleep quality, that we reduce tech activity before bed, that we take their cell phones. Kids do not have, you may think your kids have the control over technology. They don't. Kids in our school, over and over and over and over again, their parents will say, well, my child wouldn't turn their phone on, find out down the road they have. Kids sleep with their phones, and we need to stop that practice. They are not self-controlled yet enough with these tools. I really recommend their phones are turned off and collected at night. And see, you may think it's an invasion of their rights and privacy, but I would value their safety over their privacy any day. I think it's important that we model personal digital boundaries. I wrote some suggestions on this page for you to think about, and that is really removing those phones from the meals, like I said, and no checking before your quiet times. I'm not going to read that to you. You can read that. But there's a list of etiquette, internet netiquette, and there's safety tips to take. A lot of these tips are from this book. And then I want to just read to you this last quote. We can kind of contemplate it together, by John Piper. Some of you have heard me read this before, but it always speaks so deeply to my heart. So let's just spend 2 minutes. You can follow along. I'll read it, and then we can open up for some questions. It's on the last page of your tip sheet. If all other variables are equal, your capacity to know God deeply will probably diminish in direct proportion to how much television you watch. There are several reasons for this. One is that television reflects American culture at its most trivial, and a steady diet of triviality shrinks the soul. You get used to it. It starts to seem normal. Silly becomes funny, and funny becomes pleasing, and pleasing becomes soul satisfaction. And in the end, the soul that is made for God has shrunk to fit snugly around triteness. This may be unnoticed because if it's all you've known is American culture, you can't tell there is anything wrong. If you've only read comic books, it won't be strange that there are no novels in your house. If you live where there are no seasons, you won't miss the color of fall. If you watch 50 TV ads every night, you may forget there is such a thing as wisdom. TV is mostly trivial. It seldom inspires great thoughts or great feelings with glimpses of great truth. God is the great absolute all-shaping reality. If he gets any airtime, he is treated as an opinion. There is no reverence, no trembling. God and all that he thinks about the world is missing. Cut loose from God, and everything goes down.